Now it is that time of the month again where we get our good friend Ambassador Yunyo Chol into the studio to tell us all things diplomatic on the international scene. How are you doing? Happy New Year. Looking forward to the holiday?
Yes, I am.
That's the way, yeah. Well, it's been a big month. It's been a big month since we last talked. But what are we going to discuss today?
Well, this week should have been a double feature about the Korean Peninsula and the Ukraine.
Yeah.
But I think Korean situation is more immediate to us.
Right. It is. I mean, there are two big hot spots around the world at the moment. But yeah, here domestically, on the peninsula, we've had a few testers going. So what are we talking about? What is it? So
North Korea has test fired various kinds of missiles 5 times within a span of 3 weeks in the new year. On the 5th, a hypersonic missile was launched by North Korea, registering a 1,000-kilometer flight with Mach 6 speed. And when the South Korean military put out an assessment with uncertainty on whether it had really been a hypersonic one, the North responded with another launch on the 11th with Mach 10 speed, showing that it was indeed a hypersonic missile. So they also announced that Kim Jong-un was at the site of the successful launch. And 3 days later, on the 14th, the North fired 2 short-range missiles, this time the one called KN-23, which is regarded as North Iskander. And on the 17th, they launched 2 more missiles, this time KN-24, North Korean version of ATACMS, Army Tactical Missile System. And Tuesday this week, the 5th launch was with cruise missiles.
Yeah, look, I mean, when the first one popped off, I thought maybe like some other North Korea watchers that this could have been something to do with Kim Jong-un's birthday, because we know it's in early January and they often like to throw off certain types of fireworks for special occasions, but then 4 more came after one, so it can't be that big of a birthday party for him. On the other side of the peninsula, how did the South respond to this then?
Well, as you know, the South Korean government has been working hard to create a momentum for the peace process on the Korean Peninsula. The process started with the inter-Korean summits and the U.S. DPRK summits until the Hanoi summit in February 2019, which ended with no deal. So to kickstart the process, the Korean government wished to have parties agree on what is called the End of War Declaration, which could serve as an entry point to a revived negotiation for denuclearization and peace regime on the peninsula. Therefore, these kind of provocative acts do not help building the trust for new talks among the parties. The South Korean government carefully chose words not to call them provocations, but expressed serious regrets over the negative impact of these launches, particularly during the sensitive period of presidential election campaign in the South.
Right, and that could be another motivation for the North is when they do have elections in the South, they tend to sort of ramp things up and put themselves on the campaign
their bad
track.
habit.
Right, to make themselves a bit of a topic of discussion between candidates. I suppose it's a smart way for the North Koreans to figure out which president they'd prefer on the southern side, isn't it?
Yeah, to make it known to the voters.
Right. So how did the US then respond? Supposedly, it's one of the obvious or real targets of these provocations to get sanctions lifted.
Yes. In the first year of the Biden administration, the United States refrained from taking actions on various missile launches, like the Obama-era policy of strategic patience, practically ignoring North Korea not to fall into its trap. But this time, the U.S. seems to have been truly alarmed by the North's advanced capacity with hypersonic missiles. So the United States initially mistook it as an attack on the mainland and banned all the flights on the West Coast from taking off for 15 minutes. After the second launch on the 11th, and again last week, the United States, with its allies at the Security Council at the UN, condemned the North Korea's ballistic missile development as a threat to international peace and security, declaring their goal as complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. But their attempt to adopt a resolution on sanctions or even a statement was blocked by China and Russia. But the United States and Japan separately adopted a joint statement on non-proliferation that reiterated the civic goal. Then the United States imposed its own unilateral sanctions on 6 North Korean individuals and 1 Russian national, as well as 1 Russian company for their involvement with the advancement of the ballistic missile technology of North Korea. This is the first sanction, surprisingly, by the Biden administration on North Korea on nuclear and missile issues after last year's sanction on human rights ground. So the new sanction shows how shocked the U.S. government was by the test launch of hypersonic missiles.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, isn't it? It's easy to go with that Obama era of we'll just sit back and ignore them, let them play with themselves, as long as nothing's too technologically advanced. But obviously, hypersonic missiles
now.
Right, these are serious things. So they do grab the attention of the superpower. Now, why have they done this at this juncture then?
Yeah, we talked about the elections. In the past, provocations from the north was called north wind, and it usually helped the conservative side by causing security scare. But this time, it is not clear how it would affect the election process, as the North obviously favors liberal candidates who would put more emphasis on dialogue than confrontation. To a hypothetical question on how to respond to a North's launch of hypersonic missiles, the conservative candidate replied that he would employ a preemptive attack based on KMD or kill chain system, which have actually been touted by the South Korean military.
Right.
But this answer brought about a hot debate among the South Korean voters. Liberals called him warmonger, while conservatives defended his position as in line with the government's current policy. At least confusion and division has been sowed, I guess. But to this foray, the North Korean media outlet joined, calling him, yes, a warmonger.
Right. It's a pretty strong answer, isn't it?
Yes.
It wasn't messing around on that sense. So then, are Koreans getting insensitive to these kind of provocations?
Well, that's what we usually say, and people try to show their boldness by ignoring these provocations. But I think it is dangerous for South Koreans to be callous to those tests by North Korea, which are not only political probing, but also serious technical work to perfect their arsenal of missiles with the precious data it can gather from those tests. So we should also remember that the North is spending billions of dollars, which, if spent differently, could improve the lives of so many of its citizens. And they should not be allowed to get away with those violations of Security Council resolutions.
Yeah, it is an interesting one because I know a lot of expats probably feel this way as well. I've got to tend with my mum. Sending me messages because she gets up very early in the morning when these tests tend to take place, and as she's listening to the news,
she gets nervous.
Yeah, and I'll get a message when I wake up in the morning that says, "Oh, Alex, can you please just come home? Just come home." And as soon as I read it, I know I've got to check what North Korea did because that's usually what she's talking about.
I see.
So then, what are the implications then for the U.S. and North Korean negotiations?
First of all, as you said, it's not one time, but 5 launches. Nobody can execute this kind of consecutive launches without prior preparation. So the North must have been putting together a meticulous plan and put it into action with the arrival of the new year. So the North Korea is challenging the United States with this display of progress in its missile technology with the whole gamut of different missiles. Its third missile launch on the 14th came out 8 hours after U.S. imposition of its unilateral sanctions, as if protesting.
Right.
The message is that the sanctions cannot stop its progress and that it can even target the U.S. forces in the Pacific region or even U.S. mainland. It also means that its latest missiles are difficult for the U.S. and South Korea to intercept with their current missile defense system due to their pull-up maneuvering and lower altitude. Further, their enhanced mobility with the launchers on trains or TEL, so-called TEL, Transporter Erector Launcher, also makes it hard to spot the launching site. And at the Politburo meeting last week, the North indicated it may end the moratorium, which it imposed on itself on nuclear or ICBM tests, probably after the Beijing Winter Olympic Games. Some scholars even say that North Korea is proving to China its usefulness in China's global competition with the United States by getting on the nerves of Americans, and with the hope to get some valuable assistance from China in return.
Yeah, so that's an interesting point. So how will the U.S. then approach this issue, and even South Korea, if you will?
Well, all this maneuvering will work as pressure on the United States to make a deal with North Korea on its demand for lifting of sanctions and abolition of so-called U.S. hostile policy toward North Korea. But I am not sure whether the U.S. administration can offer any effective strategy to address this increasing threat other than repeated condemnations and attempts for additional sanctions, which are usually blocked by Russia and China at the United Nations. Currently, the Biden administration is in a bind, domestically and internationally. With the midterm election in November, Biden cannot afford to be seen as soft on North Korea, China, or Russia. With his poll numbers plummeting, President Biden's domestic legislative agenda hit a snag with detractors from his own party, Senators Manchin and Sinema, on top of tough opposition from the Republicans. And coming back to Ukraine, the discussions with Russia by the United States, NATO, and OSCE went nowhere. And after a cyber attack on the Ukrainian government, Russia has set in motion some operation to create a pretext for its attack, presumably to protect the Russian minority in eastern Ukraine. And surprisingly, I thought that the U.S. was not ready to put its muscles on this side. But the U.S. is now getting serious by evacuating some embassy staff from Ukraine and ordering 8,500 troops on alert for possible deployment. Will Biden really intervene? We will see. Well, Putin knows that China is higher strategic priority for Biden, and he is upping the ante to test him.
Right.
So we will have to watch closely and see how these situations on the other side of the globe affect us in Korea.
It is an interesting time, isn't it, on two sides of the world and two hotspots. Thank you very much for giving us your valuable insight on that, Ambassador. We'll catch up with you again next month.
See you next month. Happy Seollal.